All right. I would like to thank everyone for coming to the second day of Scholars Week, and especially to our keynote speaker and her talk. So you made it. Okay. Another person on the list for you to meet.
Okay.
So our keynote speaker is someone who is one of our alumni. They're undergrad here and then has gone on to do kick-ass things, which Ashley has done in spades. I have wanted Ashley for Scholars Week basically since I started as faculty here. I have tried to put the name in this year because of what Ali has been doing with museum studies, and the more students that have been filtering in front of me with their interest in museum studies, I was like, Ali, will you be my co-conspirator? Please, can we nominate her? She has to come this year. So with that, we were able to nominate Ashley and have her come. Ashley and I actually were here at the same time. I was Ashley's osteo undergrad TA, so a role that Polaris knows very well. And
I wouldn't have passed statistics without you too.
I just want that noted. I was also her undergrad statistics TA.
And that was Jones' class.
Yeah, we weathered some things together.
We did.
But I'm very excited to have Ashley come and talk about all of the wide variety and amazing things that she has done since graduating. So this is actually Zuckerberg.
No pressure on me.
Stop showing it.
That's cool. I can just talk.
Yeah. IT's right here.
Hey, Dylan. Why did it go away?
Are you duplicating or extending screens?
I duplicated. And it had it up for a second. Yeah, it just.
I mean, enough of you know me at this point. You could just interpretive dance my slides. Right?
I can hear.
I could draw a connection.
Okay.
Now it won't revert.
Round of applause for Dylan.
Yay! No, you're making me nervous. You're making me nervous. Oh. Hi. I'm Ashley, like Fiona said. I'm gonna try my best to not look at my notes, but my memory is garbage, so apologies. So when I was nominated for this and I asked Fiona what I should talk about, and she said, talk about your career and how your degree got you to where you are today. And I had to remind her that I host fashion shows and Star Wars events. That is very not archaeology. But we're going to talk about it anyway because I've managed to find a connection. That's not.
Other side of the screen.
Haha. Space bar. So I'm in public programs now at the Museum of Flight. I start all of my programs with two things: a land acknowledgement that I have mine memorized. I don't have this one memorized, so apologies. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather today on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation, the Nooksack tribe, and their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. I also do another thing, and I know this is a small group, but I'm going to ask anyway. I do a poll at the start of all of my programs just to figure out who I'm talking to. So is anybody an anthropology, archaeology major? Museum people? Anybody not know what the hell they're doing here? Okay, I thought it was just me. That makes me feel better. Because I don't quite know still what I'm doing here. But a little bit of background on me. I started at Bellevue Community College, it was still Bellevue Community College, as an animation and ASL major, and was admittedly failing for a number of reasons. that don't need to be discussed, and was watching Raiders of the Lost Ark with my mom while signing up for the next quarter's classes. And I thought, screw it, I could totally punch a Nazi. And I signed up for Archaeology 101, and it stuck. So I finished out the year and took all of the anthropology and archaeology classes at Bellevue that I could. I knew I wanted to come to Western, so I transferred to Whatcom, where I met Allie, who was a lot meaner then than she is now, as I've learned and been talking to some of you. But transferred to Whatcom, got my AA, and then transferred here to Western, where Sarah Campbell became my advisor. And because I had already gotten all the English and math and whatever out of the way, I was able to focus mostly on the anthropology and archaeology, which was great, which meant I spent a lot of time with Sarah. I spent a lot of time in the lab, probably snuck into the lab on more than one occasion as well. And I've told this story a number of times, so I know some of you have heard it already. But my all-time favorite story, because the great thing that was about working with Sarah was that you never knew what you were going to get when you came into the lab. And for some reason that I still don't understand, she had decided I was going to be the bird person. So for whatever reason, whenever we came across bird bones or even entire birds, that was going to be for me. And so I came into the lab one day and she starts telling me in very graphic detail about this dead owl that she passed on her way to and from the lab every day. I was like, that sounds gross. I'm happy for you, Sarah. And the next thing I knew, she was handing me a tray and a set of rubber gloves, and I was going to find the dead owl that she had been passing on her walk every single day. And when Sarah tells you to go collect a dead owl, do it. So I did. And we learned all about the bird skeletal system. We learned about owl pelts, and unfortunately, I've probably lost most of that. But it was fantastic. I became the bird person for, I don't know, the rest of the 2 years that I was there. And that's just a little fun story I like to share. This one, I believe, was taken by Fiona, who needs to get her stuff together. It even feels. Anybody taken osteology? Yeah. Is the osteology practicum still a third of your grade? No? Lucky. Fair enough. So when I took osteology, Fiona was the TA for that class. The practicum was a third of our grade, and so we practiced as much as we possibly could. And for whatever reason, well, Fiona was nice enough to host a practice for our class, and for whatever reason, 8 p.m. on Halloween was the only time that we could get into the lab, so we all decided we were going to make a thing of it. And we dressed up in our Halloween costumes. I'm guessing because we're smiling, this was probably taken before we had done the practice, because I don't think any of us passed that, but we made it out of class, so it was fine. But anyway, point being, I spent as much time in the lab and with Sarah and doing everything as I possibly could. And then I was also fortunate enough that the summer before field school or senior year was the first time that we had hosted a field school in, I think, at least a decade, if not longer. And I don't know if it's still out at Woodstock Farm, but we had field school out at Woodstock Farm. The issue with that, this particular year, was that the road onto the property was under construction. And so you couldn't actually just drive there. And so we would park, we'd all pile into Sarah's Astro van or whatever it was. And we would park, I don't know, Todd, you might remember. It was further than that. It was definitely further than that. But we'd park in some residential neighborhood as close as we possibly could and basically hiked in, which is probably fine for most people. But it turns out some of us are allergic to the outside. And so hiking in the half mile or whatever it was every day, combined with the fact that because the road was closed, landscaping wasn't being kept up, and so grass was knee to waist height. And that was stirring something up real good in my face there. So I spent a good chunk of field school under the influence of just about any antihistamine I could possibly get my hands on, some that you cannot get in the US as well, but were fantastic. To the point where one day, and I mean, that one's me, so it gives you a little bit idea how I was feeling. Anyway, sunglasses on, bandana, because I had found a decongestant that you could pour onto a bandana and inhale it, like Vicks, and would wrap that around my face and was essentially laying in my screen, still doing a very good job, but laying in my screen, when Todd came up and just stared at me. And I remember looking up and my glasses falling off of my face and just being asked, "Are you high?" No, I promise I'm not high. You still do your job. No, I'm definitely not. It's all legal. But I was still aware enough that I'd never showed up and had to dig pits, because that was the other deal, was if you showed up obviously hungover, you were the one breaking rocks and digging pits that day. But I never did that. Just Sudafed and Benadryl and a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But anyway, it was a great experience once we actually got onto the property. We did have a little bit of a scare one day when the unit I was working in, we were sifting through our screen and found a phalange. So site shut down for the day, make sure we weren't disturbing anything. We called in the pros. Allie came in and said, "That's a bear." You shut down for no reason. But if you have ever seen bear phalanges, they look just like ours. It's creepy. It's great. But anyway, field school. And this was the summer before my senior year. Oh, I should add that coming back from Woodstock one day, I remember being in the lab with Sarah, drugs wearing off, antihistamines wearing off, and re-upping, and Sarah just casually suggesting that maybe someday in the future I consider an indoor job, because this seemed to be an issue that I was dealing with, and it's probably not ideal to be on a site. So that said, I took her advice into account, and that year I reached out to, I thought, okay, museums are inside. That seems like a good compromise. I reached out to the Whatcom History Museum, specifically their photo archive. I grew up in museums. I grew up around photography. I thought, oh, that's a great combo. I'll do that. And I talked to Sarah, and she told me, as far as she was aware, Whatcom was no longer hosting student interns, but that it couldn't hurt to ask. So I went, I'm sure I set up an appointment, or I just went and knocked on the door. I don't actually remember. And said, I understand you're not taking on anybody new, but really interested in going into museum work, archival work specifically. Would you be open to it? And Jeff Jules, who is still the archivist there, said, huh, I thought you guys stopped the program. So that was great. So I started volunteering or interning at the Whatcom Photo Archive for the following quarter, possibly two. And I think it opened it back up after that. I hope it did. I hope people have been volunteering there. It was great. But I learned some basic Photoshop skills, sort of an intro to archival work, awesome photos. Jeff was just full of stories, some more devastating than others. And just overall was like a nice introduction to climate control, which was great for the allergies. But so I did that, which took me into spring quarter of my senior year. And I realized I was about 2 credits short from graduating. And I thought, I really like museum work. Climate control seems to be the way to go. I would like to do another internship. And I had done the student days with Allie up at the Freeman property working on the semi-annual repatriation project. And went and knocked on her door, as nice as a passable kid, and asked if she would be open and Lemmy would be open to possibly taking on a volunteer for the rest of the year so I could fulfill those credits. I didn't care in what capacity. I just wanted to be there and help and do anything that they could possibly need me to do. And Allie came back and said, so they've never done that before, and I'm pretty sure it's a long shot and it's not going to happen, but I'll try. So every day for 2 weeks, I sat outside Allie's store in a totally not harassy way, very respectfully, until she came back and said yes, and I still am not entirely sure how I pulled that off, but it worked. And not only that, they actually took 2 of us. There was another classmate of mine, Lexi Williams. I don't know what her last name, I can't remember what her last name is now. Did she keep it? Okay, good. She came out too. She was like, I also need a couple of credits. Please take me with you. So the 2 of us went out. We had a similar schedule. So twice a week, we went out to Lemmy and we went to the lab and we helped sort through and identify artifacts as best we could. We also, the big thing that we did was create a lab manual, an actual set of procedures. There had sort of been a piecemeal thing done, but it was always sort of on the fly, just given the nature of the work. So we sat down and we created an entire start to finish procedure on what to do from when a box or a bag comes into the lab to getting processed and put away, and then ultimately for reburial. And that's how we spent our summer, which was great. But then it was getting to be the end of the year as graduation, because this was spring quarter. And I was not entirely sure what I was going to do about grad school, because I just knew I wasn't going to be going in the fall. I hadn't decided what I was going to do. And I was giving my Scholars Week presentation right here on a topic I do not remember, other than the fact that our findings were statistically insignificant, and after 6 months worth of work was not devastating whatsoever. But it was after that presentation, I walked out into the hall and Allie pulled me aside and said that Lemmy wanted to offer me a job for the summer. And that was right after my Scholars Week presentation. So we're going to see how today goes. Just throwing that out there. And we worked through the summer. That was the deal. It was going to be just for the summer, which made sense. Lexi was going off to grad school in the fall. I didn't know what I was going to do after that, but I was stoked to have a job in my field, so I didn't care. And I ultimately ended up staying there for about 2.5 years. Just kept, I don't know why, but they kept re-upping my contract. It was fantastic. So that summer, Lexi and I had taken the manual that we created and essentially recatalogued everything, start to finish. And before we even started on what had come in during that time. And we counted it at one point, and it was about 17,000 artifacts that we recatalogued in about a 3-month period. She may have left me at some point, and I had to do the last 1,000 on my own. But that's what we did. We created it. I don't know if it still exists. I hope it does. We worked real hard on it. But yeah, that's what we did. We also, once we got a little bit familiar with, what we were seeing, we did more artifact identification, started sorting through human and faunal remains. We were unsure. I'll pass them off to Allie or to Joe Washington, who my favorite crew member would sit in the lab with us and absolutely not take a nap. He was just resting his eyes. But I swear to God, he could not see 6 inches in front of him. But if you put a tray in front of him, he could just, without thinking, pull out all of the ancestral remains. It was incredible to watch. I have a pair of earrings that he made for me. But that's what we did. At one point too, I dabbled with trying to work on, there had been a database at one point that we were trying to figure out how to revamp, and that just failed miserably. I hope you've had better luck with that. Microsoft Access, don't use that for a database management system. It's awful. But I also, that's why we don't have photos. One, this was long enough ago that, I mean, I'm old enough, I've lost most of my photos. I've just accepted that. But also, given the nature of the work, it was culturally sensitive work. We weren't going to be taking photos. That would have been inappropriate. But this was my view to work and home every day. And so I thought that was worth sharing. And then this is where I apologize, you guys. I struggled. This is my career, and I struggled to keep this on track. So good luck following it all. So while I was still working at LEMI, at this point I had graduated, but I didn't know what I wanted to do about grad school. And I had been talking with Joan Stevenson one day during lunch, and I was telling her, and I was bouncing some ideas off of her, and she stopped me and asked if I had ever been diagnosed with ADHD. Because every time I pitched an idea to her, like, oh, what about this? Or what about this? She was like, focus. And I was like, I am focused. My focus is just everything. And apparently you can't apply to grad school in archaeology or anthropology and say you want to study the world. They don't like that. And so that, combined with the desperate need for climate controlled and, pollen-free areas, I decided, okay, museums are going to be the way to go. We're going to switch. And I had already spent some time at Whatcom. So I thought I'll try Heritage Flight Museum. And I'm pretty sure I just showed up one day. I may have called in advance, but they're a small setup. So really, really good chance I just showed up and said, hey, I want to be a museum person, because I didn't quite know what that meant at the time. Can I volunteer here? And they said, okay, great. And before I get into what I did, everybody recognize this photo, this famous Earthrise photo. So this was taken, if you don't know, by Apollo 8 astronaut Bill Anders, who founded the Heritage Flight Museum with his son, Greg Anders, while it was still located up at the Bellingham Airport. And unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year. Was it this year? In a plane accident out on the islands out here. But my first astronaut, very nice man. So I started volunteering at Heritage Flight Museum, and they already seemed to have a project in mind for me. And a little background on the airport, if you're not familiar, it was built in 1941. It opened up to the public on December 7th, 1941. And the story is, and that they opened up the runways for people to drive on. Check out our brand new airport, come and drive on it before we shut it down so we can actually fly airplanes off of it. They were hearing the radio reports that Pearl Harbor had just been bombed. So airport was immediately shut down and handed over to the War Department, and was the first place that troops were deployed when the US entered World War II. Troops were deployed to Bellingham and to Everett down at Painfield. This is an airplane. I can guess and hope that you don't know what it is. I believe it's a P-40 on a ferry flight up to Alaska, because the concern was that the West Coast was going to be the next spot. But Heritage Flight knew, because they were located on the airport. That photo over there is the original like 1940s aerial shot of the airport. That little curvy bit with the stripes was bomb storage. But they knew that a lot of the structures still survived on the property, and based on the airport's latest master plans that had been released to the public, they had no intention of developing that portion of the airport. And so the museum wanted to work with them and try to preserve it in some way. And the airport wanted nothing to do with it, which I understand. Active airfield, why would you make it historic? That's going to put limitations on what they can and can't do. It's going to be a hassle. What we also figured out was, because we had made some friends on the airport property, that at some point, we're not entirely sure when, the port had used the airport as dumping ground. They had allowed people to come and dump stuff on the land. So we had somebody that actually took us out on the property. Don't do this. That's a school bus that's out on the property, or at least it was at the time. There were a couple other cars, printers, just junk, garbage. And so that was the other assumption, was that they didn't want it getting out that this had happened. And this here, so all of the old structures had been torn down or were just overgrown. This right here is hard stand 11. It's where they would have parked B-17s. Some of the old roads, some of the old bomb storage still exists. And so we decided that, well, maybe we can get it on the National Register, which is not a thing you try and do without the organization who you're trying to register's help. Like, that just doesn't work. It did, however, give us a really great presentation for the Smithsonian's Mutual Concerns of Aerospace Museum Conference, which unfortunately no longer exists, and was just another presentation I gave where our findings were inconclusive. So I've got a great track record on that. But while I was volunteering here, I was also still at Lummi. But we had gotten to a point with our work at Lummi that we were sort of, apologies for the airplane pun, in a bit of a holding pattern. The work was essentially done. We were weaving, we were making blankets, and we were preparing for reburial. But there was a lot of stuff that just, like my job, what I had been hired for, was the work was done or largely done. So I moved to Seattle and figured I would try and get a job there while still working at Lummi and volunteering here at Heritage Flight, which at the time is still up here, and probably not the smartest decision I've ever made, but I'm talking to you guys now, so apparently I did something. And so I ended up at the Museum of Flight 1, 2, and 3 times within about 6 months. I started, at this point, I was applying to grad school in museum studies, where you can say you want to study the whole world because you can fit it in a building. I thought, okay, well, admissions, it's not the work that I necessarily want to do, but it gets me in the building, and that's all that counts. So I started working at the admissions desk at the Museum of Flight. And so I was splitting my time. I did 4 days down at the Museum of Flight. I did 3 days up in Bellingham with Lummi. And when I'd finish my shift at Lummi, I'd go to Heritage Flight and I'd volunteer for a couple hours, and then I would drive home. And that lasted about 4 or 5 months before I totally burned out. And so I left the Museum of Flight because I could only sell tickets for so long, and the polo they gave us was hideous, and I couldn't continue to wear it. So I left admissions, but I still wanted to be at the museum. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe I can volunteer. The schedule will be a little bit more flexible. It'll be shorter hours. So I went to the volunteer coordinator, because Museum of Flight is very large. So they have an entire volunteer department. And I went to the volunteer coordinator at the time and explained to her I had experience working in a photo archive. I was looking at going to grad school, focusing on collections and archive work, and wondered if there were any openings on the other side of the street where they hold their archives and their collections. And just like Sarah had told me, our volunteer coordinator said, yeah, they're not taking anybody on right now, but I guess you could go ask. So I tromped across the street because I have no boundaries. I tromped across the street and I knocked on the then supervisory archivist's door. who is now the director of collections. And I said, hey, I know you're not taking anybody, but I'm really cool. And this is what I want to do. Will you please take me on as a volunteer? And she stared at me for a solid 30 seconds before she said, is that why we don't have volunteers? Is it they just, same thing with Whatcom, the other side of the street just had no idea. One side thought that they'd canceled it. So lesson, just ask. The worst they can do is say no. I've gotten a lot of no's. This won't sound like it, but I've gotten a lot of no's. And so I started the next week. I started volunteering the very next week, and I was there for 2.5 years, focusing mostly on cataloging their photo archive of images of the aircraft in the collection, which is a weird distinction, which there are millions. The curator at the time once told me that to catalog all of the photos in the Museum of Flight's collection, and this was 10 years ago, would have taken 8 archivists, 8 hours a day, 30 years to catalog everything. And now they've gotten more. So good luck with them. And so at that point, I was there for 2.5 years. And after that, sorry, I'm trying to keep my timeline in check, and there's a lot. I started over there. Oh, I remember now. Lummi eventually got to a point where I was only going a couple of times a month. I wasn't needed as often. So I'd only go up a couple of times a month. So again, back to needing a job. Fortunately for me, my supervisor, who he wants me to apologize for the fact that he looks like a skinhead there. He's not. He wanted me to say that. He was my supervisor when I worked at admissions. He had recently moved into public programs at the museum, and they were looking for a part-time summer person. Summer is the craziest season. They needed some extra help. And so he put in a good word for me, and his manager brought me on just for the summer with the hope of making it a permanent position. And I did that. I did eventually leave Heritage Flight because at that point, 4 jobs is too many jobs, and stayed at Lummi for a couple of days a week, and then stayed in the photo archive across the street. But the issue with working at the Museum of Flight and Heritage Flight, I don't know squat about airplanes, you guys. Like, next to nothing. Flying scares the crap out of me. Not the right field to go into. I don't recommend, well, I do recommend it, but don't do it. And my manager, the manager of public programs, huge, her dad was a pilot. She grew up on airplanes. It was a whole thing. She said one of the requirements of me taking the job was that I was going to be required to create a program from start to finish, see it out on my own. I couldn't just tack on to somebody else's. It had to be all mine. I said, I don't know anything about airplanes. And she said, I don't care. Do what you know. So I created an aviation archaeology program. And because I don't like to half-ass anything, it was a 2-day symposium with about 10 speakers from all over the world. And they continued to do it for a number of years after I left, until Flying Heritage in Everett eventually poached it. But we're not bitter about that. And it was great. They continued to do it. It was extremely well received. Just a bit of background. This is a something Corsair. It's about as much as I can give you. And in, I believe, 1952, it crashed into Lake Washington on a training mission, and sat on the bottom of Lake Washington for roughly 30 years when a group of divers pulled it up from the bottom of Lake Washington and brought it up to the museum's restoration center, where it sat for another 30 years. And they restored it. And so this is what it looks like today. This is in the corner of our World War II exhibit in the personal courage wing. And one of the coolest planes, coolest stories that I think we have. But the point being, I didn't know anything about it, but I knew archaeology. And so she told me to do what I know. So I did. But that position turned out to be temporary. So that ended at the end of September. And I'm going to make up this date, 2013, which was also final reburial for the repatriation project that happened in summer or September of 2013. But it worked out because I was starting grad school in September of 2013. I went to Johns Hopkins. It was largely an online program, which was great for me because shiny things, I could work whenever I wanted. Although still at a time where an online program was still a little bit iffy. So I did admittedly have concerns about what people would say about that. And I've blocked out most of it. I'm not gonna lie, I have very few memories of grad school. That might have something to do with the fact that I was unemployed for a good portion of it and may have gone a little off the rails, trapped in my apartment. That's grad school. That's what you have to look forward to. I did, however, one of the requirements of my program was a 2-week intensive that was held either in DC or some other rotating location. And because this was in January, I went to San Diego and I spent 2 weeks at Balboa Park in San Diego, basically exploring and working with all 29 different institutions that are located within Balboa Park. So the Natural History Museum, the 18 different art museums, the Japanese gardens, the Air and Space Museum down there, which is okay, but ours is better. And it was great. And because we were online, my network went the whole world. I had a group project where one of my partners lived in Saudi Arabia and he woke up at 3 in the morning every day so we could work in the evening. And then he would get up and he'd go to work. And dude was a trooper. But that was grad school. And at this point I was unemployed, so I needed to find a job. And again, thought, well, some job better than no job. Some museum is better than no museum. So I started working in admissions in the gift shop at the Washington State Historical Society down in Tacoma, which was nice because despite the fact that it's a smaller institution, they were still working with a 2008 recession budget at the time. It was slow, so I had a lot of time to study. And one of my assignments was to interview somebody in a position that I was interested in and hoping to go for someday. So I reached out to the Historical Society's registrar. So I thought that could be a cool job. He oversaw condition reports, the locations of the objects, loan work, copyright, image licensing, everything. And I thought that sounded like a cool job. And everybody told me not to talk to him. He was 8 feet tall, had a short fuse, and was just notorious throughout the entire organization as being somebody you do not want to run in with. And I thought, screw it, let's give him a call. And he sat down with me and we talked for about an hour. I wrote my paper, and at the end of it, I said, hey, if you ever need volunteers in the research center, I'd be interested. And he said no. He said, really sorry, we don't have enough people, so we can't train you, but maybe someday, because I do say no. And 2 weeks later, he emailed me and he said, I take it back. Meet me next week and I will start you photographing the collection. So I photographed everything from mammoth teeth to umbrellas to buttons and photos of bike races, basically anything, because it's general Washington State history. If you can draw a connection to Washington, they probably have it. And it was great. About 2 months after I started volunteering there, his name was Fred. Fred took another position at Nordic Heritage. Good for him. And before he left, he brought me into his office one day and he said, I'm leaving. I'm going to teach you how to do the image licensing because 1, I'm the only one that knows how to do it. And 2, it's the only source of revenue that the research center generates for itself. The museum, which it's connected to, does with admissions and whatnot, but the research center, they don't make money. So it's the only thing they do. And he said, and if I can teach you this, it's possible that they'll hire you, at least temporarily, to help with this. So he did. He taught me how to process incoming requests for images or photography, who went over copyright, which there's really not much with the historical collection, but it's there. And then he left. And there was a little bit of wait time, but they brought me on. I stayed for about a year, part-time. I think I was three days a week, processing incoming as a paid position, as a paid library assistant, processing the imaging fees, and then working on a handful of random projects. I worked on a deaccessioning project that included weird things like somebody's weird pet rocks that we still don't know why they're there. But it worked out in my favor because I asked. He did say no, but because I had asked. So I'm losing my spot. So at this point, telling you there's a lot of overlap. So I'm doing this. I'm still at the Historical Society or the Photo Archive at the Museum of Flight. And they had a collection from a photographer who was a Boeing photographer, PR guy in the 80s, who photographed everything that Boeing did. It was a commercial photographer. When he died in the 80s, he left the museum his collection. In the 2000 whatevers, because at this point I've lost track of what year this was, his wife then passed and she left a chunk of money to the museum to process his collection. And so because I had already been working in the archive and a lot with this collection for the previous 2 years, they offered me the job and they hired me as a project archivist to process the Gordy Williams photo archive. And as a side note, and a conspiracy theory for another day, I am absolutely convinced this man does not actually exist. I think there's another photographer who's just like, I'm going to double up on paychecks. But we're going to talk about that later. So I started doing this. And unfortunately, when the Historical Society decided to fill the position I was in permanently, make it a full-time permanent position, they gave it to somebody else. And I ended up back at the admissions desk and in the gift shop. I was also just a few weeks from graduating grad school. Yeah, frowny face. Yeah, not holding a grudge on that one either. And so I had to start looking. I was weeks away from graduating. As much as I loved the Historical Society, it hurt to go back to the admissions desk after what I had been doing. And so I started throwing my resume at anything that would stick. And because Fred had taken the time to teach me the licensing work while I was at the Historical Society, it led me to get my job at the Seattle Art Museum as the assistant registrar for rights and reproductions, which was literally what the work he had taught me how to do. I oversaw the copyright and image licensing for the museum's permanent collection. So anytime somebody wanted to use an image for anything, movies, TV, exhibit catalogs, internal marketing, that all went through me. Marketing department hated me. So I said no a lot because they wanted to get us sued. But this was my office. I was going to delete this, but I love it. I missed it. I spent 6.5 years, 2 stories underground behind 2 different levels of security, and it was magnificent. I will point out, however, so these filing cabinets are full. They continue on from wall to wall, full of black and white photos and negatives of the permanent collection at the art museum. Is anybody familiar with what happens to negatives, nitrate negatives, when they start to get old? Vinegar syndrome. They start to degrade and they smell like vinegar. And those older ones smelled like vinegar, to the point where if you get enough of them together in a space, it is actually a hazard. It is not only a health hazard, but they will catch fire. So that was one of the projects that I had to do, was to not let the building catch on fire. Although if it was going to, this was the best place to do so, because my office was actually a converted dark room. It was full on bunker with a steel door and a sink. Don't know why, but anyway, I miss it dearly, and I just needed to let you know. Other fun fact, less fun fact about the Seattle Art Museum, they don't have an archivist despite their size and despite their collection. They don't have an archivist to oversee like their historical collection. Seattle Art Museum is technically, I think it's about 125 years old at this point. It was established in whatever, 125 years ago. And so because that was my background, I took it upon myself to do that. And I started sorting through the archive. It had been half overseen sort of by our senior librarian, just because that's where it lived at the time. But I talked to her and I talked to my boss, who was the chief registrar of the museum, of the registrars and museum services, and explained what I wanted to do. And I hired a couple of my own interns, which was a weird experience to be on the other side of that. And we started processing the archive, which was a lot of hard work because we had no resources to do it with and very little interest from internal leadership. So our catalog system was Excel. We couldn't afford to replace any of the sleeves. And when photo sleeves or slide sleeves start to degrade if they're not archival quality, they get sticky and gross and they will ruin anything that they touch. So those were about the only things we could do. Some of the stuff had degraded so far that we attempted to scan some images while we could. But there was a lot of stuff we couldn't save. But nobody else was doing this. It was a little passion project of mine. And despite the fact that it is not even remotely what I was hired for, not only did they include it in the next job description for the next person that came on, but this is probably what I am most proud of while I was working there. Aside from this dress, which is made entirely out of stickers. Is anybody familiar with Yayoi Kusama? Really? No, come on, guys. She's a crazy lady with the polka dots and the pumpkins. Yeah. Seattle Art Museum had an exhibit and she had this whole thing called the obliteration room where you were given a set of dot stickers and the room started off white and the idea was that you cover everything with stickers. Turns out you can't trust the public with the sticker sheet and you actually have to peel the backing off of it because they stick it on everything. So we all started building stuff with the sheets, and I built a dress and a skull and a whole thing. We also had an annual staff art show every year because you can't have an art museum not full of artists. And I tied for first place. And we decided we were going to be dumb with our photos because, of course. So, part 5. I did fairly well during the pandemic. I was fortunate enough that Sam let me keep my job. Given the nature of my work, I could still, assuming anything was already digitized, I could work from home. And it turns out everybody else who was stuck at home, researchers, art historians, or whatever, suddenly had the time to finish those books and those papers that they've been putting aside for 10 years. And so I was busy. But also, copyright can be interesting. Contract writing, very boring. Very boring. So I was looking for a change. And I was talking to a friend of mine who had been my supervisor at the admissions desk at the Museum of Flight, who had been my coworker in public programs. And he had, just before the pandemic, become the manager of public programs. And I was talking to him one day and he was telling me how excited he was that he was going to be able to bring his team back because he had lost his entire team during the pandemic with staff cuts. And I said, hey, you should hire me. And I'm pretty sure he thought I was joking until my resume showed up in front of him. And so now I'm back in public programs at the Museum of Flight. From what I understand, it took a little bit of convincing. His superiors and a few other people, although they did remember me, questioned his decision to bring me on. Because while, yes, I had technically been in the role before, it was only for 4 months, and I had then spent the previous almost 7 years 2 stories underground trying to not talk to anybody. And now the role was to be talking to everybody. And so when they said, how are you looking forward to the change and interacting with the public? I said, yay. And I was very convincing. But it's awesome. And I'm back. And I get to do all sorts of ridiculous stuff. This is me sitting in the cockpit of a plane that I can't identify. We do a program called Spacesuit Design Challenge where we invite kids to build a spacesuit, not functioning spacesuit. That's dangerous. And we host a contest. It's a whole thing. This is Washington State Senator Karen Kaiser, who I admit I had to Google. I was unfamiliar with her, presenting us with an official Washington State something something, acknowledging Washington's official UFO history. because we predate Roswell. That's a fun fact, and we can come back to that later. That is me sitting in another cool plane, but I can identify that one. That's the Super Corsair. Only 4 of those were made, and I believe this is the only one that is still left. They have it locked down because they're worried somebody will steal it. I think what ultimately got me my job back, well, got me back to the Museum of Flight, because I still don't know about airplanes, is that although it was unannounced at the time, they were getting ready to open their new exhibit, which was called Art in Flight, which is a horrible name. But they were getting ready to open an art exhibit, and that is way out of their comfort zone. They do not, I mean, who does that? And I said, great, I can't tell you about airplanes, but I can tell you about art. And we did. And I told them, I said, we're going to get weird with it. You're going to have to accept that. And they mostly did. But over here, I don't know if anybody is familiar with Chris Hadfield. He's a Canadian astronaut. He was famous for playing Space Oddity while he's up on the International Space Station. There are so many astronauts, they have formed a band. They're called Bandella. So that is them there on the left. They played a couple of shows at the museum for about 500 people. Called me Angela in front of about 500 people, after having spent 3 days with me, calling me Ashley just fine. So that helps. Also, bit of a sidetrack. When I was in the 9th grade, I had a history teacher who said, if you remember anything from this class, remember never to go to war against England by sea. And it is the only thing I remember from that class. So if you remember anything from today, remember, never tell an astronaut that you are afraid of flying. Because this woman in the blue jacket, her name is Nicole Stott. She's the best astronaut in the history of astronauts. I made a comment to her in front of about 300 people that I don't like to fly. And she proceeded to spend the next half hour making fun of me in front of an audience, 300 people. And it's fine. We're fine. We're still besties. But she now has a foundation called Space for Art, and she works with children's hospitals and sick kids to bring art and teach about space and how great we all are on Spaceship Earth. But like what I said at the beginning, I put on fashion shows now. That's very much not archaeology. I do Star Wars events now, the biggest Star Wars events in Washington, although our marketing team won't let me say that officially. We are. And our leadership definitely questioned me when I said, hey, we should have a fashion show at the museum. And they were like, we're a flight museum. And I said, you said art. Fashion is art. A lot of people believe fashion is art. It sold out 4 days in advance and has now become one of our largest annual events. Mark your calendars, November 8th. I get to be in it this year. And I'm very excited. And it means I don't have to work it. But here's the thing, I was gonna fill it, and I'm probably totally going over time at this point. I was gonna keep it happy and full of like silly museum shenanigans, but I just spent last week down in LA at the American Alliance of Museums conference, and it was kind of bleak. So we're gonna take a minute and we're gonna talk about the fact that this is probably not the most happy time to be going into museum work. It's a little bit scary time to be going into museums or humanities in general, especially with the complete elimination of the IMLS, with NEA, NEH. A lot of people believe the National Science Foundation is next to be cut. And the Museum of Flight, we're very fortunate that we're largely privately funded. We rely on very little federal and state funding. And so we can continue to do the work that we're doing, but a lot of places can't. They're having to deal with funding cuts, staff cuts, hiring holds. They're rethinking completely how they can even talk about the programs that they're doing. There's some institutions that they won't say woman in their marketing materials because they're afraid that they'll be targeted and their funding will be cut. You can't say equity and diversity in a lot of the programming for a lot of these institutions. So, but the underlying message the entire week was, it doesn't matter what challenges you're facing, like you have to keep doing the work. If it means you don't say women and you come up with another whatever, we come up with code words for everything, you just do it. And if you are able to do it, you keep doing it. I have a program next month. It's called Sally's Day. It's Smithsonian funded program that unfortunately there was no funding for it this year, honoring Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, the first known LGBT astronaut as well. I have Eileen Collins, who is the first woman to pilot and command the space shuttle, and she's being joined by Yi So-yoon, who is not only the first Korean woman, but the first Korean astronaut in space. And that's how we're celebrating. We've lost the funding, but we're fortunate enough we can still put the event on. And because I'm not worried at the moment that my funding is going to be cut, and I have very supportive executives and staff, though they question what I'm doing sometimes. Like it's our job to keep doing the work, because we can keep doing the work. We can keep saying woman. We can keep saying diversity and equity and BIPOC and everything. So that's our job. So we're making sure we have the best, most diverse, the loudest speakers and programs that we have, because a lot of these other institutions don't. And hopefully we make it through the next 4 years, but we're kind of worried about it. But I don't want that to put you off if you are interested in going into museums, because that almost makes it even more important for you to go into it. Like, this is the time to be like, you know what? No, science is real. Museums are constantly found to be the most trusted sources of information over family, friends, news, and media, and even a lot of instances over universities and other academia. So, yes. I didn't really want to end that on a super bummer note. So if you've got happy questions or more dumb stories you want to hear, that would be great. Yeah, what? Yeah. I think he died.
Oh.
I think he died. But I don't remember. I actually was not in the camel suit, but that's Sammy, the Sam Camel. They were creative with the name there. Yeah. Cool. Well. Or I'll just stay, and if you don't want to ask a question out loud.
Like my little brother's the Star Wars thing.
Hell yeah, it's happening again next year too. Except it'll be on the 2nd because the 4th is a Monday. But I'm getting creative with the marketing for that. So many.
Yeah.
No. I had a few times where I was lucky and the unpaid position turned into a paid position. But no, it was a lot of unpaid work. There are a lot of organization, and at this point I don't actually remember if it's a law or not, but there are a lot of institutions. I know Sam started doing it. I don't remember if the Museum of Flight does it now, have flat out stopped the volunteer program in certain capacities, and will only fill it if they can pay the position. Basically, if a paid person can do it, then you're not going to have a volunteer do it. So, yeah. But they exist, paid positions. I paid my volunteers or my interns. I paid them. I was unpaid, but they got paid. Yeah, they're out there. Ooh, yeah.
Okay. Did you notice that in the names you had?
Yeah, I was in different jobs. And even at the Museum of Flight, because each time I came back, like these last 2 times, there was almost 7 years in between. So it was a completely different organization, which was the first thing I asked when I was thinking about coming back, because it was toxic when I left, largely because I was a 20-something woman at an airplane museum, and I don't know about airplanes. But yeah, it's the larger museums tend to have roles for specific jobs. You don't have one person doing 3 different things. Like at Heritage Flight, they were very small. So I think there were only 2 paid staff and the rest were volunteers. And they were admin, they were marketing, they were development and fundraising, you know, so you'd have multiple jobs that you had to do. Whereas the Flight Museum has I just found this out yesterday, 38 educators. I'm in a department of 3. There's 2 of us and a boss, and there's 38 of them. So yeah, everywhere is a little bit different, and of course, everywhere functions a little bit differently too. You know, the smaller ones get a little bit more creative and grassroots. When I was working with Lummi, we had some funding, but not a ton of funding, so we couldn't necessarily get like archive quality bags. So Lena, who is the historic preservation officer, we'd go to the grocery store and we'd buy snack bags because everything needed to be bagged. But so you kind of work with what you've got. And then state versus private was also its own weird thing that I still don't quite understand. But yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It's not like a positive question, but like, about, like, about like EI programs and how they're being eradicated basically. Do you think that would have an effect on like
Oh, absolutely. Well, so like for us specifically, and we even had I believe it was a board member or trustee tell us once that we had to accept the fact that aviation was built on the backs of rich white men. And those of us in the room were like, that's a crock of shit. Sorry, I said shit. We're like, that's a crock. Like, no, there are other stories. And we would get pushback from this individual in particular, who I think eventually left. We're like, no, it's our job. Museums are not neutral. It is our job to tell the stories of everybody that was, for us, it's the untold stories in aerospace. Bessie Coleman got her pilot's license. She was a Black woman in Chicago, pilot's license in like 1923. Like, they're out there, the stories are out there. And you can't erase that because, especially because if museums are for all, and we want to be there for you, and we want to be there for you, and we want to be there for you, you need to see yourself in the museum. Otherwise, why are you going to come? And if you don't come, you're not going to hear you're not going to learn about the other stories that we're telling. And I think we are still in a position that we're trying, that we can do some of that work. Our collections team has gotten very focused, I guess, on very intentional about what stories they're collecting. They won't just take in anything now. Besides, we've got 800 bomber jackets. We don't need another bomber jacket. But now they're taking in objects and collections that have a story connected to them, because you can relate when there's actually a story to relate to. If we can't tell those stories, what are you going to do? So I think some of the smaller institutions or the federally funded institutions are going to struggle. Some of them, I know they're still doing the work. They're just getting creative with how they talk about it. I know somebody said that they had started calling it accessibility, but that's still really close. I'm like, that's going to work, but that's only going to work for so long. So yeah, it's definitely difficult. We have a sign in our World War II gallery. It's just a little pillar on the floor with a plaque that says, we know that stories are missing. And it's basically a call out saying that we know there's stories that we're not telling in here and that we need to be telling in here. It's partially like a call to action. Like, if you've got stuff, if you've got stories you can share with us, share them with us. And once a quarter, our social media manager will post a picture of it. And it is consistently one of like the highest interacted posts that we get. And it's not always positive. It's about 50-50 of, that's so great that you guys are recognizing that you're missing stuff and that you're trying to go after all of this stuff. And it's other people going, well, the Wright brothers are rude. Or, you know, because I imagine that that's how they all sound when they comment on these posts. And it's just angry rage posts. Although we also get people who say that there's no such thing as the moon. Not that the moon landing didn't happen, but that the moon itself doesn't exist. So you kind of got to take those with a grain of salt. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a concern. Basically. But then if you're doing the work and you can't talk about the work, how do you get it out there that you're still doing the work? That's the hard part. We had a book talk. We had an author come down from Alaska. I keep hitting the thing, which is probably really bad. We had a book talk from an author come down from Alaska. The book was called Alaska Native Resistance, and it was about Alaskan indigenous communities fighting back during World War II when when the US came in and started rounding up families to put them in incarceration camps. And we can't change the name of the book. That's what the book is called. Facebook flagged our event posting, and any marketing materials. Every time we posted it, Facebook would pull it down because it was diverse. And every time our social media guy would have to go in and he'd have to make a claim and he'd have to fight for it. But only about half of them actually went back up. So you can get creative with how you're talking about stuff, but at the same time, there's some things you can't. And so you just, spam it until something sticks, I guess. Yeah. 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 Is this stuff that we're keeping? I mean, yes and no. I mean, I know the National Archive kept all of Trump's tweets the first time around. They are, I mean, born digital, media, it's still archivable. The most boring class I ever took, but I mean, it's work that needs to be done. There is a way to do it. I mean, once you put it out there, it's out there. It's just a matter of, somebody screenshot it, you're going to find it. And I think it is, I think what's happening now and just in general, it is worth keeping and archiving. History repeats itself. We got to be able to, especially because one of the concerns, I was talking to our space curator the other day, and he was talking about just in general how difficult it is to find information because if information is power, that it is extra important for us to be collecting all of this. So it is accessible, and so it doesn't have the chance for somebody to try and collect it all up and wipe it or whatever. It's then going to be, okay, we have it now, we've protected it, how do we get it back out there? And that's, I think, going to be the hard part. But yeah, I don't know, come up with a code word for everything. Yeah. No. Despite how many I try and throw out there. Yeah. Yeah, it's not always flashy and fun. And I mean, even with some of like the fun programs that we do, we have to recognize that we're going to have difficult conversations. And I'm also on our D&I committee at the museum. And one of the things that we always talk about is that you just have to accept that you're going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. But that's the only way to get through it and figure it out. And yeah, just kind of have to suck it up and plow through and hope you make it out the other side. But yeah, especially if you have the resources to do so. I'm gonna keep being as loud and whatever as they'll let me until they don't let me anymore, especially because not only have I brought back aviation archaeology, because I'm going to bring it back to that, there is a new developing field of space archaeology. So more to come on that. I'm putting together a program, but these people are hard to track down. I think I went over. Okay, good. I was worried I was going to hit the first half hour. Huh? Okay. Yay. Oh, yay. I hope I didn't crush anybody's dreams. Not today, anyway. Perfect. You're what we need.
Actually, I have another question. Building off what you asked. Do we think that private museums that don't have federal funding are gonna have to preserve the knowledge until others are safe?
I mean, I hope they do, but it depends on who's funding them. I mean, if you've got enough people that are trying to do the work and want to, but I would imagine too that there's some, because the other issue is that, like, yeah, we're okay now with our private funding, but if it gets to a point where our private donors either aren't receiving tax breaks for it anymore, or some of the like D&I initiatives are, like Seattle Pride this year has lost a ton of its major donors because they don't want those organizations donating to D&I work. So Seattle Pride is struggling. If we're doing that sort of work, it's possible that our private donors might decide that they don't want to be funding that work as well. I hope that that's not the case, but yeah, I mean, I think it's our responsibility, if we're in a position to step up, that we need to step up and sort of take it on.
Is that conversation being had amongst colleagues with private?
I hope so. I'm not up there enough to be a part of that. But I think it is, from what I saw at AAM last week. A lot of that is going on, and everybody is sort of this spoken and unspoken, like, we're gonna do it because we have to do it. So I do think there's an opportunity to step up. My boss actually emailed me like an hour before I got here, saying that he had applied for funding for something because next year is America's 250th anniversary, and the Smithsonian's giving out grants to institutions that are doing stuff for the anniversary. Personally, like, I don't give a shit, but he put in for.
You are
I
being
know. Whoops, I didn't say that. He put in for this grant and didn't get it. And it's like the first time the Smithsonian's not given us grant money. And I pointed out to him, I said, it probably went to somebody who needs it more than we do. Like, we can afford to still do the programming without federal funding. Give it to somebody who's doing 3 jobs now because their entire team was cut and they need the funding. Give it to somebody who's the entire program, education programs are being cut all over the place. I have a coworker who said his, I don't remember how old this kid is, but elementary school age kid, science has been cut and is now part of library time. So now it's reading and science. So yeah, just bringing it back down again. So yeah, I do think it is on the private institutions, privately funded institutions, to step up, and I hope they do. I'm doing what I can, but I'm a 3-person apartment and constantly questioned about my judgment. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the speakers who was from Monticello, actually. So he was coming from a really interesting place, in that he was at Monticello. He was like, this is, as in Thomas Jefferson, he was like, we can't not talk about slavery and the history of Thomas. He was like, he may have done great things, but Thomas Jefferson was not a great guy. And he had made a comment at one point about how he was just yelling into the void because everybody in that room, we were all on board with what the work that they were doing and everything. It's like, I can tell you about all this great work for as long as I want, and as long as you'll listen to me, but it's the people outside the room that need to hear it, and that's the hardest part. Yeah. No happy questions? I don't, because our marketing I asked our marketing director, I said, I have done the research. There's nothing going on this scale. We're the biggest. And she said, what do you mean by biggest? And I said, well, square footage, we're the biggest, except for maybe the 5K some town was putting on, and that's just longer. We had more people and more stuff, and we had more Star Wars stuff, and I don't know, she's just, was massive. So going back to just ask, what's the worst they can do? Our senior curator used to work at Wings Over the Rockies in Colorado, and they have an X-Wing, and he doesn't work there anymore, so what does he care? And I said, hey, you should give me your X-Wing. And he said, I don't work there anymore, but I can put you in touch with the people who can give it to you, because I don't think that they have the space to maintain it anymore. So I said, great. So I called up Lucas, and George Lucas, personally. And I emailed like 4 or 5, he sent me a list of emails, not Lucas, but our curator. He said, these are the people who you need to talk to. And I said, I want an X-Wing. And they said, we can't give you that X-Wing anymore because it's not actually ours to give away, but we have this other X-Wing. Do you want it? And I said, hell yeah, I want. Granted, it's a 3-score, but that means it fits in a box and you can get it. And they were like, great. Also, do you want to hold it for like 1.5 years? Because we're going to open the museum, and really we need somewhere to store it until the museum's open, because they're like 5 years past due at this point. And we're like, yeah, because we actually host quite a few Star Wars events throughout the year. And then we were all on board. We were talking about shipping, how we were going to get it here and how we were going to display it and where it was going to go. And we don't have room for it either, but we're like, wait, we can winch it up. And then they stopped responding to my emails. And then they finally responded and they said, oh, you know what? I don't think we have time anymore. And it took everything in me to not respond with, well, if you'd emailed me a month ago, when we first were talking about this, we could have an X-Wing. And they just said, maybe later this year. And so, you know, I was going to sit in it too. It's going to be a thing, because 2027 is the 50th anniversary of A New Hope. So I was hoping to snag it before anybody clocked that, but still working on it.